please, I'm not asking you to accept what I'm saying. I'm asking you, hopefully, to ask these questions. So what I've arrived at, and if you open my new book, Getting a Grip, because I was doing this myself, with a lot of help from my friends, I was able to do this, I think, kind of clever thing. I have the flap, the cover folds in, and you pull the cover out and you see the framing ideas for the whole book in a graphic form. And the opening of the book is what I call the spiral of powerlessness. My position, my hypothesis in this book is that we are trapped into a spiral of powerlessness. And that is the core beneath, that is the question behind the question of why are we in this tailspin as a planet. That indeed, as you know, the solutions to all of the global problems facing us are known. And most of them have been known for quite some time. There's evidence of what works, and this is, of course, what I've been doing for the last 15 years, looking at what is that evidence out there of what does work. So if the solutions are known, why is it that we're not leaping on those solutions, celebrating the solutions, and going for them? And I'm saying it is because most people feel powerless. And so I ask, why do we feel powerless? And proof of that powerlessness, that feeling of powerlessness for me, and this is very subjective conclusion, but did you know the World Health Organization says that but 8 years from now, depression will be the leading cause of loss of productive life in the world. When do we feel depressed? I don't know about you, but I feel depressed when I feel powerless. And that is the condition of more and more people in the world today. And you're an example of breaking that spiral of powerlessness because you are showing up with your power. So this book is really about rethinking power. But let me just take you through the spiral of powerlessness. At the center of this graphic are these words. The premise of lack. Lack of goods and lack of goodness. The premise of lack. We're told in the whole science, quote unquote, of economics is distribution of scarce resources. We assume there's not enough of anything. There's not enough water, there's not enough food, there's not enough love, there's not enough parking spaces. There's not enough of anything. And there's not enough goodness in human nature. That we are taught in so many different venues that if you peel away the fluff on the human character, you really can only count on a few things. And that is we're competitive because, you know, Darwin says something about the survival of the fittest, totally vulgarized and out of context and wrong in that form. But nonetheless, we learn that we are competitive and we are materialistic. And we're out there kind of elbowing each other out in the giant mall of life, if you will. If you really boil it down, that's what our culture tells us is all we can really count on. So we're kind of chumps unless we jump into the fray and elbow somebody else out to get our stuff. So if we truly accept that shabby caricature, that shrunken notion of our complexity, from that premise of lack of goods, lack of goodness, we have to compete because of lack of goods. We have to also compete because that's our nature. Then it follows like night today that we have to find some impersonal forces, or better yet, one single one impersonal and infallible law that will sort out outcomes for us because we are too flawed. We are too flawed to come together as you all are and begin to envision and commit and take responsibility for societies that work for all of us. Oh, no. We flawed creatures couldn't possibly do that. So, John D. Rockefeller called it the law of God and of nature. Ronald Reagan called it the magic of the market. Right? It is this idea that out there, if we just turn over our fate to this magical force, then we're off the hook. And that's really well and good because, gosh, putting these flawed human beings on the hook to sort things out could never work. From that point, then, the spiral keeps going. And of course, then once we turn over our fate to this magical force, it's not any kind of magical force, that is, not any kind of market. It's this peculiar notion that a market can work driven by one rule. And I've started calling it in my current, in getting a grip, I call it one rule economics. Highest return to existing wealth. Well, highest return to existing wealth, what does that do? Duh. It inexorably concentrates and concentrates and concentrates wealth. What Lizzie tried to warn us about ends up then in this concentrated wealth. And inevitably, I argue, one cannot have this degree of concentration without in some way infecting and distorting our political decision-making process. And what do we have then? Greg Pallas named it. We have the best democracy we can buy. This will be the first $1 billion presidential election. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but we were warned then, and I love this quote, because it reminds us how clearly this spiral has been understood by many great thinkers. So I want to just remind you that in April of 1938, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was addressing a joint session of Congress, at which he said, it was on the threat of monopoly, he said, "The liberty of democracy is not safe if a people tolerate the growth of private power to the point that it's stronger than their democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism." Our president used the word fascism to describe exactly what's happened to our quote-unquote democracy. Now, I have to admit, I have not found the courage yet to use the F word without quoting an American president. But I'm getting there, and maybe by the end of this tour, I'll get there. And I'm going to come back to the need for courage in a minute. So this is then what happens, and of course then, as the spiral goes around, then leads to most of us retreating, concentrated wealth and infecting our political system. 61 lobbyists in Washington for every person you and I have elected to represent us there. Citizens are outnumbered 61 to 1. What happens then? Of course, what happens, as you know, the oil industry, just to pick one central actor here, then is able to be subsidized with our tax dollars at billions and billions of dollars, and we end up then, in recreating exactly a world that looks like we are simply nothing but these selfish little materialists. So that sense of self then is reinforced by this process that so concentrates wealth and creates private government, not public democratic government, that then ends up making the rich richer, the poor poorer, and making us also afraid that the worst of us manifest, and therefore we're convinced that we really are nothing but these selfish little materialists out to get ourselves.